By the end of this course, you're going to have a basic understanding on how to use the Morpholio Trace app. You'll learn how to use design drawing tools like pens, pencils, brushes, erasers, and the color palette. We're going to touch on almost every single tool that Morpholio Trace has to offer. We're also going to learn how to manage, redline, and then send off PDFs. We're going to scale drawings and go through the settings and customize them perfectly to your liking. And finally, at the end, we're going to combine all the knowledge that we learned throughout this course and create a beautiful perspective drawing. You don't need to have any iPad experience or drawing experience. This course is great for beginners and return users looking for a refresher. Timestamps are in the description below, so you can skip around if you like. So go ahead and grab your iPad and your stylus, and let's go ahead and jump right in. When you boot up Morpholio Trace, you start at the project launch page. Along the top here, you have about 8 options. The first option is blank. This will create a new blank project for you the same size as your iPad screen. Next is custom, where you can open up an image from your library. You can take a photo with your camera and use that as a background. You can also access images in your cloud drive. We also have a lot of options that Morpholio Trace provides for us. So if we just select one of these, let's go craft grid, it'll give us the option to enter in a custom size. Next option is library, which is very similar to custom, except that when you open the image, it's going to open in its default size. It won't give you the option to change it. Next to library is PDF, except we're going to go over that a little bit later in the tutorial. Below the 8 options on the top of the screen, you have a list of projects that are available for you to open. Use your stylus to tap the example perspective project and it'll load it up. At first, when a project opens, you can see there's like a lot going on around the screen and it can be really intimidating. But don't worry about that because I'm going to break it down and make it really simple for us. Along the top of your screen, you have more or less all of your project tools and options. From left to right, we have the go back to the project launch screen, page manager. Here's your project settings, your Lasso Tool, the Smart Fill tool, Perspective tool, your ruler, triangle, protractor, and Stencils tool. You'll notice that I skipped over the AR tool because we're going to go over that in a different tutorial. Over on the right-hand side is your support and export options. On the left-hand side is the brush toolbar, or what I like to call the pencil pouch. And over on the right-hand side is your layers toolbar. Learning how to navigate and move around a new application is usually the most frustrating part. The good thing about Morpholio Trace is it uses a lot of gestures that we already know and use with the iPad and most other applications. To move around, use 2 fingers and drag them across the screen. To zoom in and out, you can pinch and extend your fingers. You can rotate the image by using 2 fingers and twisting it. It'll snap at 90 degrees, and it'll also snap at 0 degrees. Select a layer by double tapping it with your pencil, and you can use 3 fingers to move that layer around. Let's put that back by undoing the move. Just use 2 fingers and tap on the screen. You can actually redo by tapping with 3 fingers. If the toolbars along the side are getting in your way, you can tap with 4 fingers to hide everything. Tap again with 4 fingers to bring it back up. On the left-hand side is your brush toolbar, and it's got what seems like 20 different options. And to make it simple, this is just your pencil pouch. It contains all your pens, pencils, brushes, and erasers. You can customize these however you want by double tapping it and then selecting one of your options. I like to leave eraser as one of them. So now let's say I want my micro pen here, I want a marker here, and I want this one to be my pencil. This one can be my roller brush. I'll leave this as a chisel tip marker. And this one I would like to be a pastel. At the top we have undo and redo. And then you have your line weight button. This will open and close your line weight options. If you zoom in and out, you can see that your line weights respond to the scale that you're currently at. So if I zoom way out, it'll give me the larger options. And if I zoom way in, it'll give me the more precise line weights. Also on the line weight palette, you have this opacity slider. You can use this to change your opacity. The lower your opacity, the more transparent your line will be. You can see at 75%, it's almost totally opaque. The next is your line type button. If you tap it, it'll give you 4 options for your line type. The first one is your solid line. The second is your dashed line. The third is going to be your dotted line. And your fourth is your center line. Next is our colors. At the top, you can see our color wheel. Go ahead and tap that, and a whole bunch of color palettes open up for us to choose from. If there's a color palette that you like, you can simply tap the circle next to it to activate it, and it'll populate your color toolbar. If you can't find a color palette that you like, click this plus at the top here, and it'll create a new color palette. Let's go ahead and name this Custom Colors. Tap Done. Now tap the color wheel at the bottom and choose a color that you like. I'm going to go with this yellow. After you find a color that you like, tap one of the empty squares at the bottom to save it. Now let's add a dark red in here and maybe a purple. Let's go back to the Palettes tab. Let's say you don't like the colors that you chose. Swipe left and tap Delete. Go ahead and click Yes. I'm going to go ahead and activate the Diagrams color palette that came with Morpholio Trace. Find it and tap the circle next to it. The unique thing about our drawing tools is they change as you adjust the angle of your pencil. So if you use this chisel tip marker, let's select a red, and you hold your pencil at an angle, it draws a thicker line. If you draw straight up above, it'll draw a thinner line. Another tool that reacts about the same is the pastel tool. And then we have the roller brush tool. The roller brush tool will color in an area that you draw. So if you want to do a circle, you draw a circle, rectangle, and a square. Let's say I wanted to color in one of these windows. You just outline it with your pencil. Next, I'm going to show you the eraser tool. Let's draw a box with our roller brush. Tap to activate our eraser, and then you can erase straight through it. Last but not least is the eyedropper tool that's right underneath the color wheel. If you tap it, it'll bring up a crosshair that zooms in on the area that it covers. Let's say I want to get the same green that's from this tree. You can see when I put the crosshair over it, it then activates that green, and I can now draw with it. With this eyedropper tool, you can also select colors from an image that you drop into your drawing. Speaking of dropping in layers, let's look over at the Layers toolbar on the right-hand side of the screen here. The layers in Morpholio Trace work the same way that layers in a real drawing would. Layers towards the top will cover up the layers towards the bottom, just the same way as if you were to stack trace paper on top of each other. If you tap and hold a layer, you can actually move it around your stack. So let's say I wanted my line work at the very bottom. I would just move it below. Tap, hold, and move it. You can position your view around a specific layer by tapping it with your pencil. If you want to activate a layer, you can simply double tap it. And now if you're going to draw, you're only going to draw on that layer. Each layer has 2 icons beside it. One icon hides the layer. Each layer also has 3 dots beside it, which will open up the layer actions. Here you can change your layer title, the paper opacity, meaning how thick is your trace paper. Next is your drawing opacity, which will change the opacity of that specific layer. Here you can see that I'm changing the opacity of the gray layer. Next, you can change the color of your paper. Let's turn it on yellow, and then turn the paper opacity up. And you can see it starts to show more of the trace paper. Next is your paper blending mode. If you've ever used any Adobe products or possibly Procreate, this works the same. You have 6 different options: normal, darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, and darker burn. To get used to these options, I would simply play with it until you find one that you like. And below that, you have a lot more options that are pretty self-explanatory. Scale and place will allow you to change the size and placement of that layer. Next is clear, which will totally clear that layer. Next, you have delete. This is how you delete the layer. I'm not going to delete this one. Next, we have copy, which will add it into our clipboard up here. And if we start a new layer, we can tap it and it'll add it on top. We have mirror horizontally, mirror vertically, and then disable AR extrusion, which we won't go over in this tutorial. These options that we just went over will actually change if your layer is a text layer. So here you can see we have a text layer. If I select the layer actions on this text layer, you'll see we have a lot less options to choose from. At the top of your layer toolbar, you can add a new sheet. You can add an image. Next, you can add some text. And here you can change your font, your color, as well as your point size. Tap Done when you're ready. Now that we've learned how to open up a project, we know about our brush toolbar on the left-hand side, and we know about our layers toolbar on the right-hand side. Let's start to go over our project options and settings along the top of the screen. First, let's start with how to set the scale. Go to Project Preferences, and then over to the Scale tab. Next, select Set Scale. It'll give you two crosshairs that you can adjust to set your scale. Find a measurement in your drawing somewhere. This is a perspective drawing, so it's not going to be really accurate, but let's just say this is about 4 feet tall. Select whether you want imperial or metric, and then enter in that measurement. I'm going to say 4 feet, tap out, and then tap the green check. And now you've set your drawing scale. Next, let's learn how to draw a straight line and perfect curves. Let's start with our scale tools, which is the ruler, the triangle, and the protractor. Tap the ruler tool. You can move it around with one finger, rotate it with 2 fingers, and it'll snap at 0 and 90. Let's say you don't want to snap it at 0 and you want a smaller increment. Just wiggle it back and forth past the 0 a couple times, and then it will give you the option to stop at a smaller degree. You'll immediately see that our ruler is not in inches. If you zoom in, you can see that it corresponds directly to the measurements in the drawing. So remember that scale we set earlier about 4 feet? You can see that the ruler is showing the height of this wall at 4 feet. When you select the ruler tool, you'll also notice 2 more options pop up at the top. If you select the gear icon, it'll give you options for the ruler. We're going to talk about these in just a second. Grab one of your pencils or pens, make sure your line type is a straight line, and then tap one of the larger brush sizes. If you run your pencil along the straight edge, you can see that it draws a perfect line. If your ruler is kind of getting in the way a little bit when you're drawing lines, you can simply move it over to the side somewhere, and it will still allow you to draw straight lines. If you want to turn that option off, go back up to your gear icon and tap on Assist. Now it'll only draw straight lines if your ruler is near. I'm going to clear the board. What I prefer to do is leave the assist on and turn on tap to toggle. You can't draw an angle if you have your ruler active unless your ruler is at that angle. But if you have tap to toggle on, you simply start drawing a line, tap on your screen, and then it will unlock the line for you. So now you can draw it at any angle you would like. You'll also notice that you have 5 different options: infinity, 15, 30, 45, and 90. I like to leave mine set to 90. And just so you know, you can always set your angle by rotating your ruler. It'll always draw lines parallel or perpendicular to your ruler angle. If you want to rotate your ruler perfectly 90 degrees, either double tap it or tap this button at the top here. The next tool is the triangle tool, and just like the ruler, it shows the measurements when you zoom in and out. So you can see again, this wall is about 4 feet. If you draw above the triangle, it'll draw it at a 30-degree angle. If you draw it below, it'll draw a straight line, and if you draw it to the right of it, it'll draw a straight line. So it corresponds to whatever side of the triangle you're drawing on. Over here, you can't draw a 30-degree angle, and over here, you can't draw a straight line. The triangle options are similar to the ruler, and you can actually change the angle of your triangle by adjusting the slider here. Or if you want to be more precise, you can change it by using this icon. Just like the ruler, if you tap this icon, it'll rotate the triangle, the same way as if you double tap it. You can also flip the triangle on its axis. The protractor allows you to draw a perfect circle. And it'll allow you to draw a line that runs perfectly through the center of it. The protractor settings are very similar to the triangle and the ruler. Next to it, you have an input option. You can choose diameter or the radius. And let's say I want to have a 3-foot diameter. Enter in your feet and then press the green check. Now you can see that it shrunk my protractor to 3 feet. If I delete my old lines, I can now draw a perfect circle with a diameter of 3 feet. You can change your input from feet to inches by tapping on the feet here and selecting inches. And another cool thing about the protractor is you can change it into an ellipse by manipulating it with these orange control points. To revert back to its original circle, double tap it. Next, we're going to jump into stencils, which I believe is the most powerful component of Morpholio Trace. They're extremely useful in my opinion. Zoom out a little bit here so we can see the full canvas. And up at the top, we have our stencils option. Go ahead and tap that. And if you tap the gear icon next to it, you can see that Morpholio gives us a massive selection of stencils to choose from. I'm going to place a tree. So go to the Trees tab and choose whatever tree you'd like. Tap it, and then tap out. Now you can see that we have a stencil. You can resize the stencil and move it around by using 2 fingers. I'm going to put one, well, let's just put it right here in the middle so we can see it. Along the top of the stencil here, you can see that we have quite a number of options. We can flip it vertically, we can flip it horizontally, we can lock it so we cannot resize it, but we can still move it. We can lock it so that we can move it, but we can't rotate it. We can invert it. We can somewhat fill it in and then fill it in all the way. I'm going to turn off the invert and I'm going to unlock it here. And I'm going to move the tree a little bit so it looks fine. Good. Now I'm going to select a dark green over here and I'm going to select full fill. You can see that it fully filled in the stencil with that color. Now if I undo and bring it back, you can actually draw this in yourself. I'm going to select the chisel tip marker and then select a green and then fill it in myself. Let's delete that tree by undoing. Another thing that you can do is tap the invert button here, and instead of actually filling in the stencil, it's going to fill in everything around it. If you don't want to completely fill in the tree, you can tap this button here and it'll only fill it in partly. Morpholio Trace offers a lot of different stencils, and I think it's totally worth skimming through this library to see if anything sticks out to you. Another extremely useful tool in Morpholio Trace is the Lasso Tool. I'm going to select my line weight layer, and then select my Lasso Tool at the top here. At the bottom of the screen, you can see you have 4 options. The Freehand Lasso Tool. You have the Point-to-Point Lasso Tool, which allows you to draw out the points yourself. a circle lasso tool, and then a square lasso tool. For the freehand lasso tool, you can draw a selection however you want, and whenever you take your pencil off the paper, it's going to connect straight back to the beginning point. So let's say I want to select half of the lines in this building. If I stop here and let go, it's going to connect back to that starting point there. With the polygon lasso tool, it'll draw perfectly straight lines for me. When I'm done selecting, you just tap back in this white circle and it'll close your selection. With the lasso tool, you can only work with one layer at a time. Let's say that I wanted to select this sky. You can see that it's actually not selecting the sky because I have my line weights layer selected. In order to select the sky, I need to activate the layer that actually has the sky on it. Then I can use my freehand tool to select the sky and move it around. When you have a selection, you'll see that a menu pops up. The first selection is your transformation options. You can uniformly stretch and resize your selection. You can transform it in a freeform way, which doesn't keep the shape uniform. You can distort it in a 2D way. And you can distort it in a 3D way. I would just play around with all these and see which ones that you like. You can create some pretty interesting shapes. The great thing about the 2D transformation is that you can align these points to fit any type of perspective. The next option is revert to normal. So whatever transformations you make, you can rotate it. And if you tap this button, it'll send it right back to the beginning. You have the flip vertically and the flip horizontal buttons. You have the duplicate. And then you have the delete. There's actually one more tool that we should probably go over before we start editing PDFs or drawing our first perspective drawing. The Smart Fill tool can quickly get area calcs for a single area or multiple areas. It can also fill in a single area with a color or a hatch. When you select it, you can see that a crosshair pops up. You can move the crosshair around with your pen or your finger. And you can see that if I stop inside of a window, it wants to fill that window in. If I stop at the sky, it wants to fill everything in. Let's start by placing our crosshair in one of these windows. Because we already set the scale earlier, this is what's going to allow us to get an accurate area calculation. And like I said before, this is a perspective drawing, so the area calcs are going to be slightly off, but you can use the same method in any plan drawing, sections, or elevations, any type of drawing that's going to have an accurate scale to it. When you move the crosshair around to the different windows, you'll immediately see an animation pop up where the Smart Fill tool wants to get an area calculation or color it in. You can edit the Smart Fill selection live by, let's say, by making your area slightly smaller. See that? The Smart Fill tool is showing that this is 11 square feet. If I wanted to place an annotation here, you can tap the annotation button. If I want to fill it in, you can choose whichever color you want and then tap the fill button. If you want to lower the opacity of the fill, tap the opacity button and lower it slightly using the slider. Press X when you're done and then tap the fill button. The slider on the left here is called your tolerance. With the lower tolerance, it's going to stick to the same color that you selected. If you raise the tolerance slightly, you can see that it'll jump above that shadow, and then it will start to hop over the boundaries that you've created with the higher tolerance. So one trick is, if the Smart Fill tool isn't exactly picking up the boundaries that you want, you can adjust the tolerance here, and hopefully that helps. I keep mine pretty low, around 3 to 5. The Smart Fill tool also has a lasso selection down here at the bottom. It functions about the same way that the Lasso tool does, except now you can choose where you want it to fill in. You can freehand a selection, and then you can use the circle and the square tool. Another cool feature is you can actually fill this with a hatch instead of a color if you'd like. Up here at the top, tap the Smart Hatch button and then choose whichever hatch that you like. You got landscape and interior options as well. One of the best features about the Smart Fill tool is you can actually color and get area calcs of multiple areas at the same time. So move your crosshair into one of the empty windows and tap the plus button. Anytime you drag and let go of the crosshair, it's going to add that area into your total calculations. And then you can color it in. At the top right, you can see you have your total calculations. Tap it and select copy, and then tap new text layer and paste. Let's lower that point size. Change our color to black. It created a table of our area calculations for us. And because we have those calculations saved in our clipboard right now because we copied them, we can now paste them into an email. We can paste them into another document. You can do whatever you'd like with them. We're about to move into how to redline PDFs, edit them, and then send them off. If you like the video so far, please like the video and subscribe down below if you want to learn more about topics just like this. Now let's go ahead and jump right back in. Let's go back to our project launch page. On your project launch page at the top, you have your PDF option. Tap the PDF option so that we can redline some single page or multiple page PDFs. From here, you can choose a PDF that's already on your iPad, or you can open up one from one of your cloud drives. This is where your cloud drives would pop up, like your G Drive or your Dropbox. I don't have Google Drive or Dropbox installed, so only my iCloud Drive is showing up. For now, let's close out of this and then open up the example PDF markup that Morpholio Trace provides for us. Let's go ahead and hide these top two layers. I'm going to zoom into this bedroom here. Let's see if we can make it any better. Let's make sure to set the scale of this drawing. Go up to Preferences and tap Scale and then Set Scale. Let's say this doorway is about 3 feet. I'm going to go into Imperial and put in 3 feet. Then tap the green check when you're ready. I'm going to turn on my ruler so I get all straight edges, and I'm going to select a red. Open up my color palettes, move up to the architecture panel and activate it. I'm going to choose red. Let's create a new layer. Tap on the 3 dots and change it to white. Next, make sure you have your red selected, and then you can start redlining your document. Right now, this bedroom is pretty simple already, and I don't see many changes that I could make. The only thing I can think about is what if they wanted access to the outside directly from their bedroom? Within our Stencils tool, we have the option to select doors. Go down to the Symbols tab, and the top right stencil is your doors. Now, I'm going to make this stencil the same size as a door. And then I'm going to select the Lock Transformation. So now I can't accidentally resize it, although I can move it around. And I'm going to place it where I want the door to go. And then I'm going to use my red pen and I'm going to fill it in. Now I'm going to use my eraser and erase this area. Now I'm going to select my eraser. Now I'm going to select the eraser, choose a smaller size, and erase this area. Let's do a little bit bigger. If you look through your stencils and the diagrams, you can also see you have a couple more options. I'm going to use a finer point pen so that I can write a little message. And we're going to write add door. If your handwriting is as bad as mine, simply add a new text layer. Add door. Let's increase the size a little bit. Make it red so everybody can see it. To move this text, go to your three dots, move and rotate. Move it to where you want it to go, and tap the check when you're ready. I'm going to go ahead and delete add door from the other layer so you can see it. Now everybody should be able to read that. Now let's look at our page manager. At the top left, next to our preferences, is our page manager button. Tap that. You can see that there's actually 3 different pages in this PDF. You can open the different pages by simply double tapping them. You can actually change the page view at the top. If you have it on this view, you can swipe through them like a normal PDF. Or if you have it on the multi-page view, you can see them all lined up in a grid. If you tap a page and tap the edit button, it'll give you 4 options. You can add a new page. If you want to duplicate a page, you have to select it and then hit duplicate. If you want to delete a page, select it and then tap the trash can to delete it. Now let's learn how to send a PDF. Tap your page manager at the top. Let's say you only want to send off one of these pages. Tap edit, select your page, and then click the export button here at the bottom. Here you have the choices between PDF, image, or project. PDF will export it obviously as a PDF, image will export it as a flattened JPEG, and project will export it as Morpholio Trace's proprietary file type. Good, better, and best relates to the quality. Now let's say you wanted to send all these off as a single combined PDF. You're going to select the export button at the top here, and it'll give you the same options. Let's go ahead and back out of our PDF page manager. While inside of a project, we have different settings that we can adjust. Tap the wrench icon. Here you can set the scale, which we did earlier in this tutorial. You can change your units from imperial to metric. You can show your grid. And you can also change the size of your grid. So if you wanted it every 4 feet, or if you wanted to change its angle to be 45 degrees. You also have 3 different grid types. You can do one that has angles in it, and you can also do one that is just pure dots. Finally, you can change the color of it. When you have what you want, press the green check. If you don't like the grid, go down to Show Grid and toggle it off. In the Video tab, you have 3 different options: time-lapse recording, time-lapse replay, and export video. Right now I have time-lapse recording going. If you're creating a drawing, it's going to create a video of it in the background. When you want to see that video, tap the time-lapse replay. When you want to export that video, tap Export, and it will give you an option of where you would like to save it. Next, in the Preferences tab, we have the Layer Drop Shadows, Rotation Snap, and Reset Palettes. Layer Drop Shadows toggles on and off the drop shadow beneath your layers. Here you can see this layer has a shadow underneath it. If you toggle this off, it'll hide the shadow. Next is your rotation snap. If you turn it off, it won't snap at 0 and 90 degrees. I like to leave mine on. And last is reset palettes. This will totally reset all the color palettes that you have saved. Let's head back into the project launch page. Tap the gear icon at the top to bring up the Morpholio Trace application settings. Here you can see your current subscription status. Pencil-only drawing allows you to draw with your finger. If you select it though, it'll take away the option to pan around with one finger. This is because if you try to move around with one finger, you're just going to draw. I like to turn mine on, and I like to turn on one finger pan. Double tap behavior is different for every tool that you're using. If you're drawing, it'll switch between the eraser and whatever pencil or brush you're using. If you double tap your pencil when you have the ruler and triangle out, it'll rotate it 90 degrees. For the protractor, it'll change it back to a perfect circle. For the Smart Fill tool, it will open up your color palette. For the Perspective tool, it'll show and hide your guide. You can change your default units, your default layer color, and your tool color. You can change your layer background to transparent or white. These are the settings that I typically use: Imperial, Buff, Dark, and White. If Stack Layers is turned on, every time you create a new layer in a project, it's going to create the layer the same size as your base layer. If you have Stack Layers turned off, it's going to create a new layer the same size as your iPad screen. For instance, if Stack Layers is on and I go into this PDF markup and I create a new layer, it's going to create the layer the same size as this PDF markup base layer. Although, if I turn off Stack Layers, then it will create a new layer the same size as my screen. This is useful if you want to create different size or shape layers. I like to leave Stack Layers on. Next is the undo and redo gesture. If you have this on, then you can tap with 2 fingers to undo and tap with 3 fingers to redo. If you turn it off, you can't do that. Left-handed mode, I would recommend if you're left-handed. This will swap the toolbars on the left and right. And then zoom rotation lock, which doesn't let you zoom and rotate at the same time. Great job for sticking around with me through all of that. Now that we have a very strong basic understanding of Morpholio Trace, I think it's time that we can jump into our first perspective drawing. Pablo Picasso famously said, "In drawing, there's nothing better than your first attempt." Let's start a new project by going to our project launch screen. Up at the top, type the gear icon, change it to white background, and then let's start a blank new project. I'm going to go back to the project launch screen because I want to rename this project. Tap Select over here on the right-hand side, and then tap the title. And let's name it Perspective Drawing. And then press OK. Select Done, and then tap your project to launch it. Tap the Perspective tool at the top. Here you can see you have 3 options: 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and 3-point perspective. Let's start with 1-point perspective. Tap 1 point and then tap the green check. You'll notice there's a floating guide with 3 lines going through it. This guide will help you draw your perspective lines. You can also turn your grid on and off by going up to the Perspective tool settings. I like to leave mine on. I also like to use my guide, and I also like to keep on Assist, just so all my lines snap well. Okay, let's start by drawing a simple box. If you start drawing a line near your guide's dotted line, it'll snap onto that line. See, you can move it around, and if that dashed line is going through that corner point, it'll snap right to it. If I want to connect these 2 edges, I'll align the guide just like that, and there you go. Now let's finish off our box here. All right, there we go, our first perspective box. We can go ahead and throw a person in there if we'd like. Let's just pick this Karate Kick. Cool, we just drew our first dojo. Let's go back to our perspective tool and tap the settings. I'm going to go over these a little bit more in detail. You can readjust your vanishing points by tapping this. You can move it around. Press the green check when you're ready. One type of option setup that you might like is if you leave guide on, but turn off assist. This allows you to freehand draw anywhere you would like, but then when you get near the grid, it'll draw a straight line. Okay, anyways, this is our first drawing in Morpholio Trace. Let's go ahead and clear this layer, go up to the perspective tool settings and set our vanishing points. This time, let's tap 2-point perspective. And I'm going to set it up like so. Starting off, I like to imagine a space I would like to be in myself. It's also fun to imagine who are you designing this for and where is it located. For this project specifically, I imagined a small to medium-sized community space and a building where locals can gather. I typically start off with a very rough outline, and as the drawing starts to take a form, I'll start to add detail. I use a perspective tool with the perspective guide to do this. Adding in a tree or a scale figure with your stencil tool can help you better understand the scale of what you're drawing. Randomly, I'll throw on some color to see if it gives me inspiration, and I enjoy doing it with the chisel tip marker. I really enjoy the directionality of the marker and the texture it can give a heavy line weight drawing like this. At this point, I start introducing some angles that aren't pertaining to the perspective grid, so I turned off assist and I went freehand. Now that I have my concept drawn down in heavy lines, I like to lay down a new layer of trace by tapping new layer and then going over my lines with a finer point pen. And then this allows me to add in smaller details like the protruding door frame and the materials wrapping around the roof of the shorter structure on the right. After I have my perspective somewhat developed, I'll start adding in shadows using the marker. I'll select black and then I'll lower its opacity. I'll use the directionality of the sun to determine the angles of my shadows, and then after the shadows are laid out, I'll use a super ruler and the eraser to go back in and clean up the shadow edges. Don't be afraid to go back and erase anything you don't like, because nothing has to be permanent anymore. You're working in a digital space. I added some sketchy vegetation to occupy the background a little bit and sketchy rocks to anchor the ground plane. I would highly suggest though that if you are adding a new element to your drawing, you should add it onto a new layer. This just makes it easier to edit later on. Last but definitely not least is adding in some entourage and vegetation. I use a stencil tool for this and I color them in with the chisel tip marker just to give them a little bit more life. The vegetation and the people really come alive if you use different color shades and move your marker in the direction of the sun. This gives the drawing some directionality and a lot of movement. I threw in a couple highlights of yellow here and there for the interesting elements and focal points. I painted in a sky, and finally I used the eraser tool to highlight the edges of the building. Go ahead and press the green check whenever you're ready. Great job. I can't see what you've drawn, but I think it's safe to assume that it's probably pretty great. And if it's not that great, well, I'm still happy for you because you gave it a go. If you liked the video, please like the video and consider subscribing down below if you want to see future content just like this. And by the way, that video up there is one that I think you'll really like. And actually, YouTube thinks you'll like that one at the bottom. Patreon is where creative thinkers and makers like yourself can support someone like me. You get a lot of cool benefits and your name gets featured at the end of the videos like these amazing people right here. Regardless though, thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.